Hello, this is Roger Lewis. I'm going to restream the recording of the earlier presentation on major regeneration on the real estate networking platform. It will be just available privately and private links and embedded, and I'm going to edit out the bits that I've contributed just for my own clients, etc., and for anyone who might be interested. So without further ado, let's just get it up here. Let's get back to the beginning here. And here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another webinar in the Built Environment Networking webinar series. Lots to talk about, lots of great things still happening in the property and construction sector, despite the dip in economic activity, which was expected, but there's lots happening now to help us with the bounce back. It's fair to say that the effects of COVID-19 form a major part of the conversation, but I have to say Brexit has reared its head a few times in discussions this week. So not to forget that we have that to look forward to at the end of the year as well. But the good news is, I think from our conversations, we very much have a heightened awareness now of issues such as well-being, diversity, inclusive growth, zero carbon, social value. They're all very much part and parcel of the conversations that we have on webinars now, which is great. Communities seem to be stronger than ever, and fingers crossed we can see light at the end of the tunnel, and we're on the cusp of a recovery. So the government's announcement regarding Build last week was very welcome, and we heard yesterday from the Chancellor with some more good news for the property sector in terms of stamp duty and green housing. So we've had some fascinating conversations across our 90 or so webinars that we've run so far in the UK. We've covered housing, procurement, planning, infrastructure, historic buildings, and many others that are all very relevant in the context of this afternoon's discussion, which is on major regeneration projects. So I'd like to give a quick mention to our national sponsors for their support. We have Wilmot Dixon, Pagabo, Frame, CLS, Recoup Capital, New Former, CIOB, International Fire Consults, Perfect Circle, and Cornerstone. So the format for the webinar, for those that haven't done one of ours before, quick presentations from the speakers into a discussion, and we'll invite you to ask your questions via the software. You can type them in via the questions tab, or you can put your hand up and I'll invite you to ask your question in person. So, major regeneration projects. Sharing their expertise on our virtual stage today are Mark Williams, the Executive Director of Rivington Harp. Roger Lewis is the founder of Real Estate Land and Development Group. And Natasha McIntyre Hall is the Assistant Director for Strategic Development at Portsmouth City Council. First and foremost, we're going to hear from Natasha, so the stage is yours.
Hi there. Thanks very much for having me. Just a very little bit about me before I start. I represent Portsmouth City Council as a property developer. So I sit within the council, but I get to have tricky conversations like the rest of you with the planning team and various colleagues. Now, we've been really lucky so far. Our councillors and decision makers have been really supportive on actually tackling whatever we're coming out of COVID with without using austerity, and absolutely understanding that regeneration is the way to help us recover. So when we're talking about regeneration versus development, traditionally, we've really talked about that as a difference in size and it being a big project versus a small project. But I think what we're starting to do in Portsmouth and what we're very proud to be doing differently is the fact that we are actually considering how this is impacting on people's lives. So up behind me now, or below me in fact, are a bunch of slides that really show what it could be like to live in one of the developments that was built in the 1940s and 50s. And how the environment has grown up and it's adapted over time, but mostly to try and make sure that we are better connected. And most of the time that means better. If you think about wandering around one of these areas or moving around, if you're in a wheelchair or if you're pushing a double buggy, you've got a walking stick, or if you're just anxious for whatever reason, actually these environments can be really, really hostile. And they have been designed to separate vehicles from people, but actually when you look at how welcoming they are and the problems that they face whilst we've been trying to promote security and safety, they haven't been doing the job. What we're looking at in Portsmouth is putting people first, and I know a lot of people say that and they don't necessarily talk about, they don't necessarily have that at the heart of everything we do, and hopefully I'll prove over the next couple of minutes that we do. So our largest project is called Tip in the West. Now up on screen, apologies, it's a bit glittery, but actually you can see the site. So it's this peninsula here that's in front of us. This is really Tip in the West. What I was trying to show you with this flyover is actually the proximity to water. The fact that on one side it's got a motorway, so it's really, really well connected. But actually, as it pans around a bit further, you'll actually see how close it is to the city centre as well. And actually, Portsmouth is the only island city in the UK, and actually do we make use of the water enough? So one of the things that we're looking at in the West is promoting things like a view of blue, which has been proven to be really good for people's mental well-being, is being able to have that view of the sea. And again, following everything that's come from Corona, we've realised that actually Portsmouth is such a terrific place. If you're going to be isolated anywhere, being isolated where you are only ever 15 minutes away from the sea is a really terrific place to be. So we think that we're in a perfect position to consider health and well-being. So this image here now is really what we're hoping that Tip in the West will become. Numbers at the bottom are scrolling through, so it's roughly 4,000 residential units, 1 million square foot marine and maritime employment, and it's accessible water for everyone. Now, the key idea is just shown on the flyover, so we are looking at reclaiming significant amount of land here on discussion about how we do that right now. But I think you really noticed about this how green it is, and also the fact that we may have looked at massing in a different way than you may have expected. You may well have expected that we would have the massing up high around the outside to maximise those views. But what we're really doing is looking at a podium deck underneath. So we talk quite a lot about a curbless community, and that's because what we're encouraging people to do is leave their car in centralised locations. We want people to be connected. We want the area to be permeable, and we want people to really feel that they are part of their own community. So a very quick story here is that I live in a village. It takes me 10 seconds to walk out my front door and get into my car. And that used to be it. That was my sole interaction with my village. Again, as a result of COVID and Corona, actually now I get my shopping delivered from the fruit and veg shop. I have to go to the local shop. I understand so much more about what the village is doing. But by getting people out of their cars for a little bit longer, we can get people to identify that community and really find their tribe. So finding the tribe is really what we're looking at. So it's the interaction between water and living space, how those two areas come together. You are looking at quite a dense environment, people to find their tribe, whether or not what they're looking for is a little quiet piece of grass where they can sit on their own and read a book, or actually where they need to go with people. It's about making spaces flexible, so a space that could be open for a cafe actually could be opened up for a yoga class in the afternoon, somewhere for the over 60s at their own Coptico. Doesn't matter. It's about being able to find connection and belonging, and feeling like you have some ownership and in your community. And mostly it's about a sense of fun and engagement. So that's what we're trying to do with Tip in the West. We're really excited about it. We're expecting to put in a planning submission in 2022. But what's really important about it is that we've got so many other developments and opportunities that are moving on. So Tip in the West is a catalyst for us. And what we're expecting is that there are going to be so many other developments that we get to deliver before we can deliver in the West that will take those principles forward. And that way we have a regeneration that's actually improving the community aspect of development. So we're really proud of that, and I really hope that you see something that you like today and you get in touch with us. Thank you very much for listening. So I hand over now to Roger Lewis, who's the founder of a real estate land and development group.
Thank you, Natasha. Well, hello. I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to gallop through my slides here. My name's Roger Lewis. I'm a property developer, ostensibly in the past in London Docklands, but we've opened up our purview to metropolitan centres. I have two companies, a house building company and a finance company. The house building company is specifically tasked with young couples and key workers, affordable housing to purchase, not to rent. The way that I see it, the housing ladder is 100 rungs. The housing mix has gone from 75% owner occupation to 65% owner occupation in the last 10 years, from 2009 to 2020 roughly. And to me, that means that there are 10% of people renting at the moment that are doing so involuntarily, and that's due to a combination of things, which is actually related to planning policy, and planning policy is obviously interfacing with finance and interfacing with the market in general. So if we just see if I can get these slides to work. Right, so major regeneration, that's the subject of the talk. And so the question is, what is major regeneration? Well, I mean, it's all things to all men in many respects. But it involves a whole load of professionals and people in a community. And so I'll leave that question there. Now, I've come across major regeneration because I was involved in the London Docklands from the early days of the London Docklands Development Corporation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that actually means to me. Now, we can be really sort of clinical about this and very cork sniffy and technical, but what I'm interested in is people and stories, and the stories that relate to being involved in a team of people and a community of people, encouraging, embracing, participating in regeneration. And so I'm talking about urban settings and city settings. And regeneration obviously speaks about regenerating something that was there, that isn't there, that has become degraded, like the rungs on the property ladder that I've described, which is it's my business to serve my customers from rungs 25 up to rungs 50, and put people back into owner occupation that don't want to be renting. So places, people, stories, and their stories, they're not narratives. Narratives is a sort of a determinist idea of we know what's best for you, and trying to manipulate people into following a set out narrative. Regeneration is an emergent process over time. And this slide here, this gentleman here is called Mike Barnett, and I picked Mike. I saw this on the LBC website, and I knew Mike is no longer with us. He was the sensational Mike Barnett, and he was involved in this property here, which is the 33 Mill Harbour, which is now a huge block of flats. And that was a new building back in the 1980s, built by a man called Morris Pentata. I sold that site along with Richard Desmond's first headquarters for Northern and Shell, and another building next door to it, built by a guy called Brian Moss, to Western Homes. And Mike was marketing a snooker centre, and I won't tell that story. This building in the background is South Peak 3, which is now, that's emerged now as actually a big residential block, and it was an office building. And there are lots of stories related to these people, these places, and the emergent time scale, because the story of Docklands now goes back to the early 1980s. It's nearly 40 years. So, you know, is it Dogs for Christmas, Dogs for Life, not just for Christmas? And I think urban regeneration is a bit like that as well. Let's just see if I go. That's a model of the Isle of Dogs in the foreground there. You'll see here that's the Westbury Print Works, and that's obviously in the news with CIL payments. We'll just move on now. We're placemakers and not rent seekers, i.e. we're involved in the community and looking to build communities with our regeneration and not just for-profit opportunities. I'm a for-profit property developer, but as John Ruskin said, wealth is the possession of the valuable by the valiant, and the valiant create places and they're not rent seeking. Is really where I come up from there. Moving swiftly along, this gentleman's Robert John. Robert negotiated £300 million contribution to the Jubilee Line extension, and you can see Canary Wharf in the early days behind Robert there. Great documentary, place in that's called the Battle of the Docklands. Suggest anybody watches that and get a lot from it. And community neighbourhood plans is a new planning thing. There's one on the Isle of Dogs. What I was saying earlier about places, people's stories and not narratives. It's an important point which I won't expand on because obviously I'm time limited. That's the London Docklands area. It was an emergent process over many decades, and Tower Hamlets have now taken over from the LDC, took over on Tower Hamlets, and then there's also Southwark and Newham involved as well. And there's this ongoing interface between private sector guys like me, Richard Desmond, and the current council led by Mayor John Biggs, who has very strong views on things like community infrastructure levy. And the LDC history website is something I think anyone will benefit from looking at, because there are lots of people, lots of names, lots of stories, and it's a great achievement, London Docklands. I'm very proud of my small part that I played in it, and I celebrate regeneration, and I'm here to say that we can, through regeneration with ambition, restore prosperity to our inner cities. So that's it from me. So I'm going to hand over now to Mark Williams of Revington Port. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Roger. Probably over a bit. My career started out in the Docklands. I was famously on site where Sir Christopher Benson announced Canary Wharf in its inception. It's amazing to see it now.
You're muted, Mark.
Okay, well, you've all just had a very good story about the Docklands, so I'll skip that. I was simply saying that my career started out in the Docklands, and I was there when Sir Christopher Benson announced Canary Wharf, and how it's changed. Rivington Park, we are on the UK. I'll get these slides to work. So we've got something like 200 million of construction projects on site at the moment, and about 500 million in the development stage, and a capital value of projects of about 1.25 billion. So we are active, but we cross the divide. We work both with local and partnership with local authorities, and also with global capital providers and banks. So we do see it from all sides. I was asked to really start with the question, why should we regenerate? And I think everybody would recognise that city centres have been too retail focused. They've become too dull, and critically, they forgot that it was about people, places and purpose. And I think that's come through in what Natasha was explaining. COVID has simply accelerated a trend that was there. And the cliche is that 10 weeks has accelerated it, but so 10 years has been constituted into 10 weeks. And it's true, the changes that we're seeing now are significant, but that does provide the basis for regeneration to now take forward and create much better places. So just giving you some example projects that we are involved in, and they pick up this theme. The first is Chester. That picture of people digging the turf, we kick-started this in the middle of COVID. So this project has gone on site in COVID. The council signed it off in the COVID period in lockdown, and it is regenerating a part of the city centre, right in the heart of the city centre. But it was very horrible 1970s buildings, bad design, no sense of place. What we're creating is a £70 million construction project for a new market hall, retaining the quality listed buildings, which you can see at the bottom of the slide, a new theatre, the new cinema adjacent to the new theatre, and new car parking. But critically, it's creating a sense of place, which you'd think like a place like Chester would have. But actually, when you go around it, there really isn't a central congregating area, and this is going to provide that core place, which is very much what the theme of COVID is forcing people, what we now need to see happen in places. Swansea, which I've spoken at length about on some webinars like this is phase one. The City Council needed to regenerate a little bit like Portsmouth, but it's way behind. Sort of 1960s, Luftwaffe 1960s designed buildings, with the sea, which is its biggest attribute, completely separated from the city centre by a stop-and-go dual carriageway. The project is creating a new arena and a bridge and landscaped areas connecting to it, but then more importantly, phase two is going to look at a more bigger master plan of bringing in housing, bringing in offices, a sort of public sector hub, and also looking at consolidating the core retail part of the city centre. So that project started in December, and with social distancing, we have managed to keep construction going through COVID. But again, it's taken 25 years of the private sector to try and make it work, have failed. The City Council stepped in, they're making it happen, and actually it's designed very much with the themes that are now emerging in terms of the world that we see going forward. At the other end of the scale, we're working with Wolverhampton City Council. The site in yellow represents some 38 acres in the heart of the city centre. Wolverhampton it's coming up its 21st anniversary as a city, but it has no central place. It has greenery outside the core, but not inside it. There's something like 80% of the students who go to the universities are from within the West Midlands area, but there are very few opportunities for them to start up new businesses within the city centre. So this is looking at a mixed-use project which would help regenerate by way of housing, by way of incubator office space, by way of public events area, as well as leisure. Note, we're not building any new retail, we're consolidating it. Oh, there it goes. We're going to have to go back on this, but the last one was simply Newcastle. Thank you. Newcastle is a very successful city centre. However, the core spine, Northumberland Street, does not connect to the two universities or to the civic buildings. It's also separated by a bus highway cutting right through the middle of the city, and we're working with the council to look at the pedestrianisation of Blackett Street and then the reimagination of all the side streets that connect the other parts of the city into the core area. So this regeneration is really about dealing with the fringe areas to help support the core rather than focusing on the core. And I will now hand back over to our compere. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to invite everybody else to join us back on the virtual stage. Good stuff. I love these webinars on regeneration. We always pick on some great schemes, and you guys have certainly brought several to the fore there. One conversation we had last week at one of the webinars was somebody asked, what's the difference between regeneration and development? It was a question that was posed to one of the developers that did a lot of regeneration schemes. So if I was to come to you, Roger, with that question first, what would you say is the fundamental difference between regeneration and straightforward development?
Regeneration for me is brownfield development, and development is greenfield. So, and brownfield brings with it a whole set of issues related to things like land remediation, contaminated land, dealing with social issues that have emerged out of declining commerce in communities. So, regeneration is your fixing something as well as building new stuff, whereas development, you're not fixing anything. You've got a clean slate, as it were.
Natasha, can you add anything to that? Is it as straightforward as greenfield and brownfield?
I do. It's really fascinating, actually, because no, I mean, I would tend to describe it by the size of it, and a development being a single building or a number of buildings that contribute to an existing community, whereas regeneration is something that works substantially on developing the community. So, example I read about this morning actually is Stockton-on-Tees and what they're planning to do with their city centre, and actually the scale of what they're doing, they're taking out buildings and putting in a park, but the impact it has on lives means that I would class that as a regeneration rather than development. So yeah, for me it's impact on lives, whereas traditionally it has been on size.
Okay. And Mark, your expression of 10 years evolution in 10 weeks, I have used that a couple of times since I heard you say it at the Swansea and the Wales webinar we did a few weeks ago. But if we were to take sort of Swansea as an example, the regen there is effectively replacing buildings that are no longer fit for purpose. Do we think that this is part of the natural cycle? In 30 years' time, could we be coming back and talking about regenerating your scheme that's in Swansea? How can we avoid this, and how can we, to some extent, future-proof regeneration when we've got a world that's changing as quick as it is? Sorry, that's a hell of a question, I realise.
No one can give you the definitive answer to that. I think the reality is that a lot of development took place, particularly in the 60s, some in the 70s, as a consequence of a catastrophic event that was namely the bombing of many of our cities. And the need was speed of construction, the technical, at the time, there was a lot of bold new architecture that went into some of that. And I think we're judging buildings now, 40, 50 years on. The reality is when they were put up, some of them were quite stunning. They may have been built with materials that would not stand the British weather, or built poorly, or without the benefit of hindsight in terms of design construction. I think the difference now is we've learned lessons. We will continue to learn lessons, but the fact is we need places that we plan things in zones, we segregated things, and actually the public spirit, and COVID has proved that, we're social animals. We like to mix our uses up. So living and offices together. You know, when I started my career, you know, the golden rule was you don't want to have shops underneath houses. You don't want to mix housing as part of a commercial development was non-institutional. Whereas the reality is, the lessons learned abroad, particularly in places like Germany and France, those mixed-use projects have withstood the test of time. So I think we can look back and be critical of some of the mistakes taken, and certainly public transport planners they really did dictate the size of roads, motorways into residential areas, dual carriageways splitting city centres from the beach. It just didn't. It wasn't good planning then. I cannot see how it's good planning then, and it certainly isn't good planning now. But are we going to make mistakes? Yeah, I'm sure we will do. But I think we're making them with. But a lot of the projects that are emerging, King's Cross and picking other people's projects, they're stunning, and that will still be there in years to come. The buildings may evolve, but the place won't. The place has been transformed, as has Canary Wharf. That area, it's fantastic. The buildings may adapt, but the place has been created.
Natasha, how long has Portsmouth been working on your scheme? What's the sort of timescales for getting it to where it is now? Sorry, Natasha, I think you're muted. Sorry. Oh, can anybody else hear Natasha? Is it just me?
I can't hear Natasha, no.
Okay. Right. I'll come back to you, Natasha. Keep talking, and as soon as we hear you, I'm going to ask you another question. So Roger, I was going to come to you next to talk about London Docklands and the fact that there's two of you here that are Docklands veterans is quite useful. How crucial was it that the London Docklands Development Corporation was formed and you had an SPV that was able to influence and put its weight behind the scheme of that magnitude, which continues to grow as we know now?
In my opinion, it was essential because it encompassed 3 boroughs: Southwark, South-Thames, Tower Hamlets, from Wapping through to the Isle of Dogs, and then Newham out into the Royal Docks. And the infrastructure that required to go in, because remembering the docks were poorly connected, so people couldn't steal stuff. Docks generally, that was the idea. And so the sheer scale of the infrastructure that had to go in meant that it had to be coordinated, and the what would be the word? The labyrinthine planning system really needed to be short-circuited, and the LDC did that. There are criticisms of the LDC which I agree with, and there are also plaudits I agree with. It's a curate's egg.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was essential. Sure.
Okay. Natasha, hi. Still struggling? What I'm going to suggest while you're doing that, if you want to try dialing in on your phone, keep the picture on your laptop, try dialing in on your phone and see if you can get the audio via your phone, and we'll see how we go from there. I've got a long list of questions for you, so hurry back. Right, I'm going to pick off a few now in terms of the ones that are not related to Natasha. So I've got one from Marcel Ridyard, who was asking a question. Marcel is from AFL Architects. Hi, Marcel. Got a question to the panel. Are you starting to see more and more biodiversity and public space in your projects? Mark, do you want to pick that?
The projects start with creating a sense of place. So the regeneration we're involved in is about, it's a public area is the heart, and everything builds off the back of that. Clearly you have to have the uses around it, but we are very firm in the view that the projects need to be designed to create this sense of place, and the thoughts and the amount of stakeholder engagement we're just doing that at the moment in Newcastle, in terms of what people want and how they want to use it and how it functions and how it looks, is critical to the whole evolution of that area. Building the uses in the box is relatively straightforward. Obviously, how it looks like on the outside can adapt, but fundamentally it's that public space that is going to create the joined up thinking. And I think that's the difference between development and regeneration. Regeneration is creating benefit, and that's why I think it creates benefit far outside the physical building that you're creating.
Okay, this is sounding like Natasha's coming back now, which is great. So you've got your mobile phone working there, yeah? Say something. Ah, good stuff. Keep the microphone.
I don't know what's happening. My computer says I'm not on mute.
Oh, okay. Now I have no idea what's happening there. So, what was the question I was asking you? Oh, yes.
Biodiversity. Oh, you don't have.
Biodiversity. And the original question was how long has Portsmouth Council been working on this scheme to get it to where it is now?
I was sort of hoping you were going to forget that. So, yeah, I've been at the council for 2 years, and the more public engagement we do, the further back this project appears to have gone. So I think a healthy estimate is 30 years. But it really got going probably about 5 years ago when we secured funding from central government to be able to start kicking it off.
But there's been so much work to do, you know, around the land reclamation, around local plan, around all of that stuff, just to be able to get to think about it. So yeah, it's taken quite a while.
Okay, so the easy question that we then picked up afterwards was from the floor, which was with regards to biodiversity and green space. And we were just talking about how sort of green space is now fundamental to placemaking, particularly over the last 3 months with COVID-19. Presumably that's your experience as well.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we've had in the West the entire time is that actually we desperately want to over-provide in green space according to sort of planning conditions and all of that kind of thing, because we believe that, and you know, I use that expression of being able to find your tribe. Actually, if we do what we're proposing to do, is create a curbless community or a carless community where the cars are separate from the people, actually people then walk out into public realm already, and then you can start to create subsets of that have different uses or different flexibilities that allow people to feel connected to that area. So it becomes safe, it becomes inclusive, but mostly people are able to find somewhere that they belong. So yeah, it's hugely important. And we talk a lot about, I think we've got at least 70% of the residential units we've got have got a view of blue, and the rest have got a view of green. So we're working really hard to make sure that people have that. Okay.
Just want to come back to you, Mark and Roger, sort of linked to the question that I asked Natasha in terms of the length of time it's taken for Portsmouth to get to where it is now with that scheme, you know, 30 years, but every time it goes to consultation, it seems to take a little bit longer from what Natasha was saying. Mark, was that your experience with Chester and Swansea and Wolves, or were they a little bit more encouraging for you?
No, I think the history of those projects where the city councils wanted to bring in a joint venture private sector partner. Swansea, it goes back over 25 years. They've gone through two listed property companies, I won't name them. Both failed to deliver for commercial reasons. Chester, I think they went through 2 pension funds and a property company. And so in both cases, there was a realization that if they wanted to deliver it, they had to basically seize it themselves and get on and do it. And we can have a big debate around public sector intervention, but I think in my career, if you want to see these major projects happen, the reality is the public sector, it is the town. They represent the residents of those areas. So it's their towns. They know what their residents, their catchment want. You need to have strong leadership, both probably executive and political. And the reality is they've got to step in and do some form of intervention. You can then look at how you bring the private sector in different forms. There are various forms of funding assistance, but fundamentally those projects, if they'd been left to the private sector, they would not have happened.
Okay.
I think I disagree with that, actually. In fact, I don't think I disagree, but I do disagree with that. It's more complex than a binary thing about public sector, private sector. And it comes back to the point that I made earlier about places, people, stories, and not narratives, and actually listening to what all parties and stakeholders require. And the word here is stakeholders, and the private sector doesn't exist in a vacuum. Generally speaking, it comes from the community in large part. Whilst we're in a global world and there's an external capital question, very much where you have local entrepreneurs promoting a scheme, and I consider Richard Desmond to be a local entrepreneur promoting Westbury Brickworks, for instance. And he's been treated as some sort of pariah with this promoting the infrastructure levy and the project viability to do with that. Now, this comes to the timing question. Richard's owned that site since the early 2000s. It's been in the planning application process since 2015. In 2018, the revised scheme went in, and the viability has been through 3 phases. Speed to market is very important for us capitalists, and where there are delays, okay, and they are political delays, okay. These are political delays coming from the local authority, right? When you've got your own skin in the game, you want to have a certain planning process, and you need to be able to go through those processes and know where you are. So in the current muted reforms, which Stuart Lipton is putting together with the new government proposals for planning, which are being handled by Robert Jenrick, there was a great article in the FT about this 2 weeks ago. What they're actually saying is that something more akin to zoning in the United States may actually help with bringing that process forward. And actually, planning, I heard one of your seminars a couple of weeks ago, I think it was in Ireland, and there was a planner stood up saying, well, we haven't quite finished this plan, but we've made a lot of progress for our 2023 plan. So we've already got the plan for 2023. We haven't finished the plan we've got now, but we know what we're going to do there. Now that is basically overthinking and over-legislating and not actually being involved in a communication where you're doing team building. Yeah.
Can I bring you back to the question, because I want to try and keep this on point. I've forgotten the question. Can you remember the question?
Yeah. Well, the question was about, I was taking issue with what Mark said about local authorities stepping in is essential, and the private industry wouldn't actually be doing these things unless they're led by the nose by local government, central planning. I say that's not true. I'm a market animal, and what we're seeing is people misreading market signals and ignoring them, and we're also seeing a misallocation of capital based on this determinist idea of, you know, daddy knows best. It's very patriarchal. I'm not for that. I believe in a real communication. I very much like the Charette's process that was for community involvement in things, and that's very unlike the thought leadership ideas of, say, organisations like Common Purpose.
Okay, Roger, I'm just going to stop you there. So, sorry, I want to try and keep these answers short and punchy, if we can.
No, I understand.
Natasha, if Portsmouth Council had tried to offload your scheme onto a private sector developer, from your earlier comments, you'd probably struggle to do that because there's clearly a lot of risk associated with your project. So you've got to bring all parties together. I assume that you might need some private sector input into that scheme.
Absolutely. Look, I came to bulk of my experience in private sector, and I came to public sector to use my powers for good, and to really help give things back to the community. And I believe that that's what councils can do, provided we can extract the funding from central government. So, I mean, let's all gang up on central government here. However, no, the councils can't do it ourselves. And also, what's really good, and one of the things I really respect about Portsmouth particularly, is that we are not trying to green, we are trying to deliver to the city. So we've already gone out with stock market testing for Tip West. And if there are any latecomers to the party who would like to come and talk to us about being involved in some sort of partnership going forward, then we'd be delighted to hear from people. But right now we're looking at that, and we are trying to make sure that actually we're looking for the right long-term partners at the moment, for people who can help us to improve Portsmouth as a whole, not just this gateway project. So no, it cannot be pure public sector. There's no way we would expose ourselves to that much risk. However, I don't believe that private sector could take on the enabling works and the infrastructure works that would be required to get this to a site that was developable. So they need us as well.
Okay. A question to you, Mark, that's come in, that's been emailed to me. It's from Michael Grimwood of CLS. Michael asks, to what extent does planning risk deter developers from potential opportunities?
Okay, my comments are outside of London, because I think London is a bubble, so I'm going to ignore that. Planning risk for uses outside of London is not a risk, as a broad brush statement. Local authorities are desperate for regeneration the cities and towns are desperate for regeneration. If somebody is stupid enough to come up with the idea of having a nuclear power station in the middle of the town centre, then planning is going to stop them from doing it. But within the realms of being realistic, uses, mixed uses, so offices, leisure, incubator space, parks, we have not had an issue in the substantive aspects of planning. Of course, the detail, that's another matter. You know, quality, making sure it's proper stakeholder engagement, that's critical and important. But planning itself is not an obstacle to regeneration. Funding is the obstacle to regeneration.
Okay. Do you have a view on that? Keep it short. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm interested, Mark, because you've got your Swansea scheme. Do you know much about the Swansea barrage? And this, you know, with the eco question we had earlier, the Swansea barrage, I'm very interested in. You mentioned nuclear power stations too. Do you know if the Swansea barrage got into planning? It was last week, I think. I was talking to Robert John.
Well, it was last week, but the city is definitely seeing that going forward, yes.
Yeah, because I'm a big fan of it, and it makes all the sense in the world, and yet it was, you know, noses was.
I think
Robert tells me
inspiration here, rather than sort of, I use nuclear power station as slightly glibly in terms of the town centre perspective. I think the question is focused on town centre regeneration, and I do not think planning per se is the obstacle to regeneration.
Well, it's one of them, isn't it? I mean, it's the Grand National, isn't it? You know, maybe it's Beecher's Brook, or maybe it's the Canal Turn. It's one or the other.
I've got a question for Natasha from Simon Centane, who is Assistant Director for the Property Services Newland Housing Trust. He's asked quite a few questions, actually, but first one, what challenges do you expect to encounter in the reclamation of the land in the Portsmouth exercise, and how will this be funded?
So loads of challenges, not least with ecology, everything's going on there, but we've got a great working relationship with Natural England, RSPB, various other regulatory authorities that really particularly care about what happens when that land is lost from being slightly underwater. Obviously it's owned by Crown Estate, so we talk to them a lot about how we go about doing it, but also any opportunities for working together to sort of improve that general area. There are loads. Most of them can be solved with a lot of conversation and a degree of funding. But the funding, you know, how we reclaim that much land, there are various options. We could look at whether or not London, if it's digging up the tunnels, whether or not it needs to dump a load of land somewhere, and we can offer them some very nice home to that. Or actually, because we've got the Navy there, who have to do a lot of clearing of the also dredging of the harbour, we could use that as a waste product. We're not in the detail of figuring out exactly how we do that, but we know we have options. But if you want to get in contact, either through LinkedIn or my email address was up earlier, I'm more than happy to talk to him about the specifics of the project.
Okay, there you go, Simon. I have a question from Robert Sine of Newland. Again, just linked to this, bearing in mind the predicted sea level rises over the next 20, 50 and 100 years, how do you factor that into your scheme? There you go.
We build it a bit higher. It's one of the things around the solution that I talked about with the podium deck. That I'm not an engineer, and this will become painfully clear right now. We have a small piece of land. We want to make it bigger. One of the options that we could look at is digging our small piece of land down a bit deeper and taking the waste and pushing it out. Then we've got a hole. If we fill that hole with podium deck and servicing and logistics for the site, actually it means we don't need to buy in a load of fill, and we have a place to store a whole load of services and moving parts like cars or buses or whatever. So we think that actually works very nicely to help us do that. But we are very, very aware of it. The city actually as a whole is at the moment working very, very hard with the Environment Agency to build flood defences around the entire island. So yes, we are aware. Thank you.
Roger, question to you from Steve Timms of Hawley. how do you see, it's to the panel, but I'll start with you, if that's okay. How do the panel see placemaking and tangible sustainability coming together in the future? Steve works at Hawley, so obviously has a building services and energy view on things.
Well, I serve my customers, and I can't get away with palming off any old chat to my customers, even though I'm at the budget end and the start home end of the market. People aren't forced to live and or buy in my places. Occasionally they're kind of excluded by misallocation of credit, and we've got a finance company to address that. Sustainability, are we talking about environmental sustainability or commercial sustainability? Because sustainability is this very ill-defined term that people bandy about. But if there are two broad types of sustainability, economic and environmental, so it's a two-headed question. Which one would you like?
I think he refers to it as tangible sustainability. So I'm going to take an interpretation from that question.
Economic or environmental, they're both tangible.
Okay, well, let's go down the environmental route. Steve works for Hawley, so I'm fairly sure that would be the bias.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the work of Thomas Rao on materials passports and the circular economy. So I think we'll see more circular economy type development. We'll see more materials passports, more laminated timber, reinforced steel type buildings. There's a fantastic building in Gothenburg called the Universium, which is a huge timber frame building. Marvellous, by a Swedish architect called Gert Weingarts. They're PLA architects that did Westbury Fruit Works. They've got a large timber frame skyscraper that I think they designed it to put it into somewhere like Sydney. So I'm very excited about those sorts of things, breathable buildings that absorb carbon, all of that sort of thing, green roofs. I love all that stuff. We had green roofs specified on my data center development in the late 90s. The free market does these things because it adds value for our customers. It's not something that we have to have a finger wag at us to do, because it's our, we're part of the community. We want sustainability as much as the next guy. We want to live amongst the communities that we're serving. Well, that's my point.
Okay. Mark, I said in my introduction really that sustainability and zero carbon, if we stick on the environmental aspect of sustainability, are very much at the top there. So this question is, how do the panel see placemaking and tangible sustainability coming together? How do we make it work, I guess, is another way of asking.
Well, it's good design. It's good design and planning. Sustainability isn't an option. It's as Roger has said, it's what the stakeholders, society, cultures, environment, the places where we work want sustainable environments. They want nice places. They want, they want nice places. And nice is a very hard to define word, but everybody who's on this webinar is an expert, because you can go somewhere and if you feel it's right, then it ticks that box, and it has to be unique to the location it's in. Each city, each town has to build on its own heritage. But the sustainability to be honest, it's more, we don't really talk about it because it's part of it is into the DNA of the whole design process. It's no longer a kind of, have we ticked that box? It's from day one. It's just built into the whole way in which we operate. So we don't kind of separate it out. It's just part of the function in the way that any other part of the development is.
Yeah, and you would agree with that, I'm sure, Natasha. I'm not asking you that question. I'm really looking for your endorsement, I suppose, on behalf of Portugal.
It's a shame. I've got two very quick points on it. One of them is part of what we have for Chittner West is the fact that we looked around and we realised that people can choose to eat organic, or they can choose to be vegetarian, they can choose to shop plastic free. But it's very difficult to choose somewhere that allows you to live in a place where you can choose sort of the ethics of the lifestyle that's around that. So it's one of the things that we really want to tackle with Tipner. We want to go above and beyond, but future-proofing is really difficult. And I think that it sort of feeds back into everything. And in terms of good design is not just the design that you come up with, but it's actually the process of doing it. So we're implementing BIM across all of our projects now, and I think that feeds back very nicely into what Mark said, right, in one of his very early questions about we are going to make some mistakes, and then Roger's comment around circular economy. We need to be able to know how to take these buildings down again so that we can put them back up later with significantly less waste than we are currently seeing when we're trying to take down a building in the 1940s. And I think that feeds into sustainability too.
I was talking to Ivan Harbour at Roger Sturt Partnership just the other day about Place Ladywell, which Lewisham instigated. He designed, and it's the most wonderful. They're taking it down at the moment to put it up somewhere else. I bid on a site just down the road from there in Lewisham a couple of weeks back. There were underbidders on it, unfortunately. But I've got a meeting with Ivan next week, and we're going up to have a look at something else I'm bidding on. And they, with Aircon, have come up with this modular building offsite construction. I mean, it's miraculous, this stuff. And what I've been saying to my people, people like Chris Phillips, I was speaking to Chris yesterday, and I said, look, Chris, you know, what you guys are doing with Ilke Homes, for instance, Ilke, the offsite modular people, is great. What Tom Blossom is doing with Urban Splash, with his new app, you know, for designing places and what have you. It's tended to be aimed at the build to rent. And as I say, the first 25 rungs of the ladder fine, but once you get to 25 to 35, you're going to bump into me, because that's my customers. We've got dibs on those, and we're going to be competing for those units or for those homes, those plots. And from 35 to 50, that's a very interesting space. In that space, I'll be competing with my old friends Bob Weston and Stephen Cope with Fairview New Homes. But this modular thing is one of the most exciting things, and it is sustainable by definition. I was speaking to my old friend John Gibson yesterday. He's been importing timber frame houses from Germany since William Berry were basically stiffed by the government on these academy schools dealings. And John, fantastic QS, very, very knowledgeable builder. William Berry's used to be the oldest building firm in the city. And like I say, they were stiffed by the government at the end of 2009. And the simple fact is, you know, there are a lot of well-meaning people with this centralised planning thing, but there are also a lot of people that are actually dangerous to let near this toy box, because they don't understand the process. A high-vis jacket and a high hat, a hard hat, doesn't make you a property developer. Sorry, but that's the fact.
Okay, I want to get to the final question, if I can. We're sort of talking about major regeneration. We are where we are with regards to the pandemic, and it would be wrong to reflect a little bit, perhaps, on the impact that it's having, maybe on your schemes, on the bigger picture. So, Natasha, in terms of the context of your scheme, but also in terms of Portsmouth's bigger picture development and regeneration plans, what's the sort of medium to long-term effect of something like COVID-19?
I agree entirely with what Mark said earlier about actually speeding up the sort of it being a catalyst and us thinking about things differently. So it's really allowing us the freedom to think about development slightly differently. So we work really hard to do that in Portsmouth, to think about things differently, and we are pushing against open door with our councillors at the moment, who are really supportive. So, as I said at the beginning, we are trying to not use austerity, but recognise that the recovery and regeneration is a vital part of the recovery of the city. But if we don't do stuff that's future-proofed and it is different and allows people to live in a slightly different way, where they can choose when they need to be on their own and when they want to be part of the community, then we'll stuff it up. So it's a great lesson to learn, and if we don't learn the lessons, I think we'll find that more development fail.
Roger, quick reflection.
A friend of mine died of it, Pete Keir. He was a pioneer in college, so God rest his soul and condolences to his family. We haven't been able to have a memorial to his fantastic life yet. Nothing more to say than that, really. I hope that anyone that gets it recovers swiftly, and hopefully herd immunity will emerge in due course.
Okay. In the context of property and
it's thrown up a lot of, it's unwanted, but it's thrown up a lot of surprises. It has, people's behaviours have changed, communities have, how the public, all of us, function has changed beyond all recognition, and I don't think that's a short-term factor. We've re-established ourselves with our communities. As Natasha said, she now knows the people in her village a bit better. The reality, we've all become more community orientated. We've learned that actually that's quite nice. We found that we're social animals, so we've changed our behavior. Our working practices have changed forever, because we're not about to go back into, the Chief Executive of Barclays said, he doesn't expect to see 7,000 people back in Canary Wharf. The reality is, offices, how we shop, how we socialise have changed. The key thing is to capture the positive things that come out of that evolution. And there are definitely some positives. It's going to be brutal economically for a lot of people, including developers, investors, as well as the wider public. But if we can see our way through it, we should end up with better places. And in that sense, that acceleration of the change is perhaps economically better that acceleration has happened quickly rather than death by 1,000 cuts. And I think a lot of decisions will be taken recognizing that actually is not an option. We just have to get on and do it. So yeah, I mean, nobody wanted COVID, but it's happened, and now we've got to really build on the positives that come out of it.
Yeah, indeed. So, right, well, the clock has ticked over to 3 o'clock, so we are just about done. So thank you very much, Mark, Roger, and Natasha, for your thoughts, sharing your opinions on major regen projects. Whole lot of questions unanswered, but to you in the audience, if you'd asked a question and we didn't get quite round to asking it, then a couple of the speakers have their email addresses there. If you're not able to get their email address, if you want to drop me a line, I will pass it on to whichever speaker you like. So a few housekeeping issues from me. We are going to look at major regen projects focused on the Midlands on the 30th of July. And then for those that are really missing the one-day conference experience, we have a very nice bit of software that we now use for one-day conferences, which has networking rooms, it has roundtable discussions, breakout areas, as well as the main stage and the exhibition area as well. So we're doing digital construction tomorrow. We have the space sector, which is a massively quickly growing sector, on the 16th of July. We have zero carbon on the 17th of July, and then our crystal ball gazing post-COVID-19, the Future Property and Development Conference, which will always be interesting. So there's quite a few experts on that slide that you can see that we've managed to persuade them to give us their opinion as to what the world is going to look like in the next few years. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you to you, the audience, for listening to the panel. If you want to join me on the wrap-up Zoom call, I'll see you there shortly. And to you, the audience, I hope we'll see you again very soon. Thank you for your support. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Well, that was an interesting experience watching that back. It went by very quick at the time. Let me just get back to just yours truly. What an interesting discussion. Mark, obviously ex-DTZ, Cushman Wakefield, one of my old partners from my old consultancy firm is actually with Cushman Wakefield now, working what they call client side with the Department of the Environment. It's Jeremy Smith. And I was talking to Jonathan Fennick earlier, ex of Grant Partners, now with Olympus Homes. And Jonathan and I had a long chat, and we were talking about Tim Davis, who also used to be at DTZ, Pat Garay, who Mark would know as well. Natasha, I've not come across before. I'm really impressed with Natasha's presentation on Portsmouth. I should be having a nose down there and see if we can provide some Portsmouth lofts for our 10% of the market that I described in some of my comments there and in my initial comments. And I thought the comparing was excellent. I had to edit my presentation from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes on the hoof. I'm not sure how successful I was with that, but interesting comments and interesting takes. Mark, I think, has a much more sort of top-down approach, if he doesn't mind me saying, to my own approach. My approach to business and development in general is very open source. It's almost an agora type approach. Agorism is a form of anarchism. There's a guy called James Corbett in the Corbett Report who lectures about agorism, and my take really is more of a sort of a communitarian thing, like John Ward at the Slog, and a distributive approach, a la Hilaire Bollock and G.K. Chesterton, and Chesterton's Gate. Chesterton's Gate, what that basically says is before you change something or go and interfere in something, you need to put a gate in first before you build a fence. And that is something which is at the forefront of my mind in thinking in terms of community infrastructure levy being applied as a wealth tax. We had a pre-discussion when we talked about CIL, and we had a bit of a chat about the World Bank report on capturing land values, where the CIL policy, particularly from the Planning Officers Association, and as is sort of set out in various sort of technical documents, it clearly comes from there. It's almost cut and paste, and it is really a stealth wealth tax rather than looking at infrastructure. Now, provision of large-scale infrastructure, it's a team effort. That's the standard argument against laissez-faire or anarcho-capitalism is, of course, that the public good, as John Hearn says, the economics lecturer, the public good needs to be served by the government. Now, I don't agree with anything John Hearn says, far from it, but he and I are mates, and I understand his point of view, and he's got a lot of good points to make, and that's one of them. So it's not actually a valid criticism of my lot being free market for-profit developers, that we're falling down on the job in actually stepping up and providing what our customers are sending us price signals to deliver. Our ability to deliver what our customers are telling us is constrained within the planning process and also in the capital allocation process. I mentioned the Financial Times article, which is very important, 2 weeks ago, talking about the planning reforms, which Robert Jenrick is leading, and Stuart Lipton, who built the Broadgate development, is also sort of, giving his input on. And the point I made about going more to a zoning type approach, and giving more certainty. Very important speed to market, very important in terms of the huge upfront costs of planning. There's one of the questions there, are developers put off by planning risk? Planning risk is a thing. In fact, I mentioned my friend John Gibson and William Verry. That was a planning risk question. William Verry, the oldest firm of builders in the City of London, bid on community schools, tendered for them, drawing up the plans. It cost them £4 or £5 million. They won at tender £243 million worth of government contracts, which were basically evaporated overnight. So a political decision, and left William Very, which was a very, very successful building company, regularly doing contracts, making 10% profits on turnover of 100 million a year plus. To give you some idea, Mount Anvil, who recently will own £50 million by Sadiq Khan, that's the sort of level of their turnover now. There's another construction company called Tide Construction, and they have a similar sort of turnover and profitability. And William Very were at that level back in 2009, before all of this massive quantitative easing and central money reserve printing. It's not money printing in the sense that the gold bugs tell us, but it's free money to crony capitalists. And so the funding questions here, we also had an interesting chat before and afterwards, where I was saying, well, we've got a finance company. The magic money tree is real, and it's a misunderstanding of how that credit allocation works, which allows the sort of credit misallocation which leads to some of the large mistakes. Now, I pointed in my presentation to an interview with Robert John in the Docklands film, The Battle of Docklands, and Robert mentions in that three things, very important things. The £300 million contribution to the Jubilee Line the Jubilee Line wouldn't have happened without Paul Reitman and Robert John. It just wouldn't have happened, and without that 300 million quid. Very, very important. The other thing that Robert, because in 1992, Olympia New York went into administration, and there was a big downturn in the early 1990s. So that's when I started my first business. And the interesting thing that Robert says about then is that the credit allocation to property development topped out at something like £45 billion when he thought it would be 25 billion. Now, 45 billion is chump change now in the world of trillions. Now, big numbers are not something which touchy-feely social scientist types can really get their head around. Well, I can, scientific notation kind of helps us out with this. There's a very interesting page. I'll put a link in the description. A description all about the exponential function, describing the exponential function, scientific notation for non-numerate people, or people who aren't as comfortable with large numbers. And I also did a very interesting post about the Federal Reserve's balance sheet in relation to cryptocurrency, size of cryptocurrency, other markets, etc. And Tony Robinson, who's quite a well-known YouTube personality, made a very good video actually explaining the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion. A million here, a billion here. Pretty soon we're talking serious money. A trillion. They're not just telephone numbers, these are interstellar distance numbers. And effectively, we got into a little bit of the circular economy there. But in the circular economy, what you have to understand is energy-based economics. So I'd recommend that you look at the Surplus Energy Economics blog by Dr. Tim Morgan, which is a very good introduction to that field. And what it's about is resource economics. You see, money and credit is a token. It is it's a placeholder for value. The value is in the resources. So that's the energy and the materials, and also the human resources. And you mix those things up and you create wealth. And money is not wealth. Money is a measure. It's not a measure of wealth so much as a token. It's a claim on wealth. and there's a world of difference between the two. These are the sorts of discussions which property developers like me, who have access to large funds of capital and large lines of credit, and what our job is to actually see where the market signals are and make sure that we use the credit and the capital which we have access to apply resources where the market signals tell us that they're needed. And that's based upon, a market is a very democratic thing, whereas centralized planning is not democratic at all. And Mark and I have obviously got slightly different takes on this. There'll be matters of difference between us, will be matters of degree rather than matters of kind, but a small emphasis here and a small change in direction there over large regeneration schemes with very large numbers involved can lead to compounding into quite serious errors. And these are the questions that we are needing to address at this particular time. So I got a lot out of that. I hope that you did. I hope that you benefited from this this restreaming of the live stream. I've certainly in this lockdown, everybody using Zoom and Skype side of things, I've embraced. I've actually watched quite a few sort of seminars and discussions. It's something I've done actually for many years. I've followed David Harvey's course on reading Marx, for instance. I'm not a Marxist, but David Harvey's the best teacher that you can get to actually find out, well, what is it all about? And I figured, well, I kind of like to know what they're on about. I followed one at Stanford on digital signal processing, for instance. I followed the whole course. I did another physics one on magnetism and stuff. Loads of interesting stuff. Just one final point, clearing up on that point. When I was in the Docklands with my data center scheme, east14.com, back in 1999, I was asked by the London Docklands Development Corporation to give a talk at the new East London University, because they had a talk about digital commerce and the internet, and clearly as a data center developer. I was competing with a guy called Andrew Ruan at the time, and Richard Branson had a data center company and all that. So this is just prior to the dot-com bubble bursting and all of that. So these are in the days before, what's his face, the Amazon man, Jeff Bezos. He wasn't even a billionaire back then, and Mark Zuckerberg, I think, was a twinkle in his mother's eye back then. Back in those days, remember, it was actually Friends Reunited. Then we had MySpace, and then we had Facebook. And so what I gave my talk about was about the internet and digital commerce. And one of the things I said, which cracked up an old mate of mine, a guy called Jamie Martin, that runs a home shopping thing now, big business that Jamie runs now. And what I said was, the internet is a library. The internet is about information. It's not about pornography. And it was it was a very serious point to make. And there are things happening in the digital realm, and which will feed into these questions of capital allocation, and also the ability to access ownership of properties, which is, I think I made it quite clear that 10%, I think it's shocking that 10% of people that are renting would rather buy. It's not an original idea. Joseph Proudhon had a long argument with Bastiat in which he made this very point, and Proudhon's arguments regarding social credit, sovereign capital creation, and the general liquidation that would come about from sovereign credit creation not at interest would, you know, why would you rent if you could buy? Very simple question, and the answer is obvious. If you can buy rather than rent, you will do it. That is now a cultural thing in the UK, and we're falling back behind the other G20 countries. Precipitous drop from 75% home ownership to 65% home ownership in a matter of a decade is, if it's not been noticed, that's negligent. And it looks like policy to me, people. But we're here to address that. And real estate, land and developments, we're the champions of the striving, you know, hardworking, key worker people that want to buy their own home. And you know, I hope that the discussion today went some way to persuading people to maybe look at some of their build to rent and look at the market selling it too, because we need competition. Because I mentioned Beecher's Brook and the Canal Turn earlier, didn't I? In one of my answers, and you know, it's a steeplechase, and a one-horse race is never terribly interesting. So that's it, people. Hope you've got something out of this. I've enjoyed it, and good night, and be lucky.